This is Maureen Kafkis, the Brain BS coach, here to tell you about the episode today. So, in this episode, I speak with somatic coach Betsy Jensen. I saw a post that Betsy made in a group that we're in on social media, and she talked about a book named Anchored by Deb Dana. I love the book. It has a lot of great information. It's going to be super helpful to a lot of you, and it's been helpful to both Betsy and I as well. So, we're going to talk about it in the episode today because it is so important to cultivate awareness around your nervous system and to develop a relationship with it where you're actually consciously managing it. So here you go, episode 149 of the Brain BS podcast, Anchoring Your Nervous System with Betsy Jensen. Do you want more out of your life but not exactly sure what that might be? Are you longing for something but can't quite put your finger on what it is? That is the universe speaking to you, and it is time to listen up. I'm your host, Maureen Kafkis, the Brain BS coach. I created the Brain BS podcast to help people define what success means to them and show them how to get it. I help you to let go of fear and doubt and prepare your nervous system for success. I show you how to understand your own energy and to trust yourself to make all the decisions. If you are ready to go inward and stop looking outside yourself for all the answers, this is the podcast for you. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Brain BS podcast. I have a guest here today. She's a coach, Betsy Jensen. I'm going to let her tell you what she wants to tell you about herself in a minute. The reason why I invited Betsy on was because I saw that she was talking about, I planned on inviting her anyway, but I was waiting for the right topic. And when I saw her talking about a book by Deb Dana called Anchored, I immediately thought that I would want to talk about that. And then once I picked up the book, I knew I wanted to for sure, because I think it's a really hands-on, practical book that can be applied even after somebody watches this episode. So, All right, Betsy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the audience what you want them to know about you?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy Jensen. I'm in the state of Utah. I came to coaching a roundabout way. I was a physical therapist for 20 years and then fell in love with coaching, and with my own health issues, found the mind-body approach. And I love the new neuroscience that's coming out about the power of thoughts to change and heal your body. And once I started learning about all the new neuroscience of pain, the nervous system stuff really clicked in and made sense. And I studied the nervous system. And that's really what we're going to talk about today with polyvagal theory and how we can see our nervous system as this protective mechanism that can either work subconsciously and have all these things happen, including our thoughts and feelings and even symptoms in our bodies, or we can start to befriend our nervous system. And that's what Anchored actually talks about, befriending your nervous system and working with it so that we're not run by our survival responses.
All right, that's awesome. And I love that you were a physical therapist and I was an occupational therapist.
Oh, no way. I forgot about that.
I was for a
That's so
couple
awesome.
decades. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Same.
love that we're taking it out of traditional setting, OT and PT. And you always bring that with you, whatever you learned, once a PT or OT, always. But I love that we're looking at it in a more current and holistic way than we would have, years ago.
So
All right.
cool. Yeah. Okay. I didn't even know that. Very cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to let you, So I'm going to let you explain what polyvagal theory is. And I'm going to tell the audience that Betsy and I both discussed this at the beginning, and we are not like history kind of people. So it's very easy to Google and get information. So if you want the history of where it originated, you could just look it up. We're more about talking about the benefits of it and how to apply it. So I'm going to let Betsy get started by telling you about the theory.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the nervous system is the vagus nerve is running throughout most of our body, from our brain to our body. And it's this connection. And most of the fibers are actually transmitting information from our body to our brain. So there's this subconscious thing going on that if we have an incident when we're a child and there's something fearful, there might be an adaptive state we go into. And then in the future, something that triggers that, we'll just go into that state. So for example, if someone, we were raised with a lot of yelling, we might feel on guard and maybe shut down, with a yelling situation. And then in the future, just hearing, someone with their voice raised, you might start to actually physiologically change in your body because of this subconscious nervous system response. So it's really good to start to understand that we have these responses. Fight or flight are more activating. Shutting down is more like freeze or fawn. There's really a lot you can get into with mixed states, and they call it, dorsal or ventral. So there's a lot to get into, and I like to just keep it as simple as possible for discussions like this, but know that but I'm not giving you the depth, obviously, right? I'm giving you the very 4 basic states of fight or flight and freeze and fawn, but there are more nuances if you get into them, right? So, but basically, just thinking of it as you're either, your nervous system's either in this protective state trying to protect you, one of those ways, or it's in a relaxed rest and repair state. So that you can think of as, that zebra on the plains and a tiger's chasing them. But then when their tiger's not chasing them, they go into this rest and repair mode where their body heals and they eat and they digest and they reproduce. But with us, with humans, with our large prefrontal cortex, when we're no longer being chased by a tiger, right? There's no survival threat. We can go into our brain and think of the future and the past and create those stress hormones and create the sensation of being chased by a tiger just from our own thoughts. And that's really what brought me to this work is, I actually didn't have a lot of trauma growing up. I was lucky to have a wonderful, loving family. Of course, I had things that were stressful to my nervous system, but I really, I was from a religious family. And so I always just felt bad about myself. I was critical of myself. I always thought I needed to be better. I was pushing myself to be very hard or to, do more and never rest and can't be happy till everyone's happy. And that was so stressful on my nervous system that it doesn't have to be just from, abuse and the kinds of trauma that we think about. It could be from even things that weren't resolved, like falling off a bike or hearing bad news and not having someone to process that with you. Those kinds of things can become these nervous system habits and responses of just kind of going into a shutdown state or activated state with any kind of trigger that remotely resembles it now.
Yeah, that's so interesting because after I started reading it and I was more aware of what it said in this book, I realized how often my nervous system does get activated. And if you look at it that way, you kind of deal with it differently. It's like, oh, okay, something like, so for me, I've gained a few pounds and I haven't been feeling great. So when I go to put on clothes, I have this whole reaction in my body and I'm like, what? And then it goes back to like when I was younger and in high school and my weight would fluctuate and stuff. And it hasn't for a long time, but there's definitely an autonomic nervous system and it is fight or flight. Like it's like this adrenaline rush where you kind of panic, by the way. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my nervous system. Like this is what this book is talking about.
Yes, those things are happening. That's a perfect example. It's happening hundreds of times a day that we don't have to consciously think about these things, which is the benefit. But on the other hand, sometimes we get really controlled by all these environmental things that trigger us. And we're like wanting to change everything on the outside so that we can feel better. But the beauty of this work is that we can start to regulate our own nervous system so that we're able to be in a lot of different environments and tolerate more and more and see that, we have more tools now, or we have more resources than we did as when we were children, when our nervous system was developing. But again, it starts with that awareness, just starting to even realize, what does it feel like when my nervous system is activated and shut down? Because many people, they'll recognize the big stressors, but there's this kind of insidious level of stress that they're just used to. And so they think, oh, I'm not stressed right now. But there's the daily, criticisms of themselves and I should be better at this. And even those emotions of things like shame, that's part of the survival state of freeze. So so many of these emotions that we're working on, like not people pleasing or, being more confident, they have to do with survival states too. So that's why changing our thoughts can help in so many ways. But when we harness the power of like understanding and working with our nervous system, some of those thoughts that you keep trying to change, and it's like there's this disconnect between your brain and your body, like I understand it consciously but I'm not able to like really make that change. A lot of times it's because of your nervous system.
Yeah. So really it's developing a conscious relationship with your nervous system, and it's the true mind-body connection. And that we can
Yes.
actually have an impact on it, because it feels like you don't have an impact on it when you're not aware that you can have an impact on it. So it's a really good book. I'm really glad that you recommended it and we're talking about it, because the nervous system regulation is really important to me, because when I first started out in coaching, it was all about thought work. And I do think that that's really valuable, but there's so much more to it. You can
Yes.
reprogram your subconscious and your unconscious just by changing your thoughts. It's more complicated than that.
Right. Yes. And I thought for me, it helped me have actually so much compassion for myself to learn about the nervous system and these nervous system responses. Because, sometimes when you hear about something like procrastination, for example, we're like, why do I procrastinate? I want to do this thing. I can't get myself to do it. But then when you understand that you're in the freeze state, like it makes a lot of sense that you're immobilized at a basic physiological level, right? And it's not like you're making it up or you're exaggerating or pretending. Like your nervous system is sensing danger and immobilizing you at that level, right? So maybe there's something quote unquote dangerous about sending out an email or making a post online or something, but that's why we procrastinate, when we understand that it's just part of this fear and this freeze response, and we can lovingly address it versus, oh, here I am, I wasted another day, I'm horrible at this, and why can't I just get it together? That puts you further into freeze. But just having the vocabulary of like, oh, this is just this state I go into, it's an adaptive response trying to keep me safe, then I could just relax about all this judgment I had about myself and why things were happening the way they were. I'm like, oh, my
Yeah.
nervous system makes sense.
Excuse me. Have you read the book by Terrence Real called Us?
No, I
Is
haven't.
this really kind of it's interesting because it's almost like the same thing that they're saying in both books, but he does it from the behavior when you're triggered. And Deb
Oh,
Dana is writing it from the nervous system when you
yeah,
get triggered. So when you
yeah.
go into like the ventral vagal part
Hmm.
of where you're like at your kind of in your higher self and you're able to connect with other people and do all that, Terrence Real calls it the wise adult self,
Oh,
person
okay.
that responds to things and
Yeah.
doesn't react. Whereas the other part is like the adaptive child self.
Oh, exactly. That's
Right?
what it's
It's the same
okay.
thing. So
Adaptive
it's like
child.
really, so I think like for some people who learn better by starting with thoughts, his
Hmm.
book is good. And then for people who learn with the nervous system first, because everybody's different, then I
Yeah.
think Anchored is really good. So
Anchored is really good. And like you said, that ventral state, that parasympathetic calm state, the ventral state is one that a lot of times we don't feel, or we don't feel very often, or we don't feel on purpose. And especially like a lot of moms, they don't want to just be relaxed because they think if I'm relaxed, I'm not a good mom, or you don't want to let your guard down too much. So we get into these patterns of high alert that we have to actually practice, like building a muscle, getting into that ventral state and staying there longer and longer and feeling safe to do that. And that's what Anchored is about.
yeah, and also I love this because just think about how your nervous system impacts your relationships.
Oh, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, people aren't even thinking about that because they're thinking behaviors and this person did that and this person did
Yeah.
that, but nobody's realizing that a lot of it is how you're being triggered and reacting to what
Yeah.
somebody else is doing, that's really where the solution is in taking care of that.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes my clients joke because they're like, so basically, with every problem, it's regulate your nervous system. But the answer is that because when you are in that regulated state, that is where you can connect with people the most. It's where you can learn. It's where you're creative. It's where you're inspired. It's where your body functions best. It's where your immune system works best. Your inflammation is down. Like, it solves so many problems just getting to that ventral state, that parasympathetic calm state, rather than, trying to change all the circumstances around you and people around you. And, that causes a lot more activation, right? When you're just like, this has to change, this has to change.
Yeah. And that's also is, correct me if I'm wrong, but neuroception is your nervous system's intuition, right? So you're definitely going to be able to hear that better in
Yeah,
a calm state than if you're like, oh, well, nothing good is going to happen when you're in that adaptive child self or like really activated state.
exactly. Like, there's those survival states where you're literally using your survival brain, your lower brain function, and your amygdala, like and the limbic system, these emotional centers. And then in the ventral state, that's where you use your prefrontal cortex the most.
Yeah.
And I know, since you, I know you comment on like the Abraham Hicks stuff. If you're into alignment, like when you hear them describe that state of alignment or flow or being in the vortex, that's exactly how they describe the ventral state of the
Yeah.
nervous system.
Yeah. For me, the ventral state is when I'm living consciously and
Yeah.
my higher self.
Yeah.
And, and when you're like that, other circumstances don't really bother you as much.
Right.
Nothing bothers you as much, right?
Right.
And it's
Yes.
accessible to everybody, but they don't realize that. So
Right.
which is why we do this work, right? So we make people aware that you can actually have a bigger impact on your nervous system, on your relationships, on everything about yourself if you decide to do it consciously. But that's the awareness has to be there, and the intention of being willing to do something new and different and have an open mind.
Yes. And that neuroception you brought up is the way, it's the gateway. It's like feeling what's in your body, noticing those sensations in your body, starting to notice those little heart rate changes when get nervous about something, and your stomach clenches. Instead of thinking it's the food you just ate, you realize, oh, my stomach clenched because I was reading this email and I had some emotion and I started shutting down. That neuroception, a lot of times we aren't very connected to our bodies, or if we are, it's in a kind of like rejection sort of way, like, oh, here's this thing my body's doing again that I don't like. But this is like starting to listen to those tightenings of your body, when someone's talking about a certain topic or in an environment, and noticing that neuroception changes with your environment and your thought environment.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about self-regulation versus co-regulation, because I'm all about doing things collectively. I'm all
Yeah.
about community and collaboration. And I think that there's a push now we're trying to figure out how to do it ourselves
Yes.
to feel better. But I think that we have to be willing to receive from other people and have a give and take between all of us.
Yeah, I loved the emphasis she made about that in this book, because I think there is almost a um like, you should do it on your own in a lot of self-help, right? Like, be independent and not rely on anyone else, and you should figure this out on your own, is kind of this like thing that a lot of people believe. But in this book, they really emphasize one of the core principles of your nervous system, of polyvagal theory, is that co-regulation is important. So co-regulation, as it sounds, it would be regulating with someone else, or it could even be an animal. It could be a pet, which is a nice way to start. But our nervous system, it's not just about what happens to us, it's about how we process it. So that's why some people have really horrific traumas and they are still able to live amazing lives, and because they've been able to process things, right?
Mhm.
And other people might not have ever had huge traumas, but nothing has ever been processed. And so they're just, always acting from those survival states. But um, part of processing is being witnessed by someone else, being able to have a compassionate witness that just hears you. Or, touch can be very regulating. There's a lot of studies showing how, a hug or human touch can change your hormone levels and your dopamine and your happiness and well-being. But yeah, just realizing that we are not meant to do this alone. This process, it's not like you don't use this as an excuse to be like, okay, now I desperately need friends, and you're going to be like really clingy for that romantic relationship or something. It doesn't have to be like, you have to have a best friend there all the time, but even just talking on the phone to someone, or just talking on Zoom to someone, or, interactions that involve another human, that part of regulation is equally or more important than how you regulate on your own.
Well, so I think this brings up a good point too. And I believe this was addressed in the book, that loneliness, can have a big impact on your nervous system. And you
Yes.
can be in a room full of people and still feel disconnected and feel lonely. And then you could totally be by yourself and not be lonely at all.
That is a good point.
Right. So it really is about, it's about it's about your connection with yourself too.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And that is such a good point, because it's one of those things where it's like, it's more about our perception, and we might not feel safe in a certain situation that is very safe. She uses an example of like going through airport security, all those things designed to keep you safe, and you may feel less safe. So that's where that neuroception is so important. That's where you feel how it feels in your body. And someone else could say, well, for me, I like this. And you don't have to, compare yourself to that person. Some people like a lot of stimulation from other people, and some people, they could be, just with that one other person, and that's super fulfilling. So
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of like listening to your own body. That's what I mean by that neuroception, and
Mhm.
starting to trust that those things that feel better to you are something to pursue. Like those kind of thoughts that feel better are helpful to you. Those kind of activities that you're doing that get your mind off it and you feel enlightened, like do more of those.
Yeah, and I think it's also another thing that I got from this book is that ever since I was little, I've had this persistent motor neuron twitch in my face, and
Mm.
it fluctuates. Sometimes it's more prevalent and sometimes it's like not. So it's definitely related to my nervous system. And I've always had it. And when I was little, my dad would yell and he always made me nervous, and I was scared of him. I ended up having a very close relationship with him by the end of his life. But when I was little, he made me a nervous wreck. And
Yeah.
I realized when I was reading that book, I was like, oh, so I think it's also something to point out that just because you've had something for a long time in your body that's related to your nervous system doesn't mean it has to stay there. You can question it. That, like, I really thought that there was nothing. I've done therapy over the years, coaching, but I never even talked about that because it never even occurred to me that I could have an impact on it. And now I
Oh,
started this breath work program with
yeah.
Alexandra Caprice and reading that book. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm going to really make this better. And I'm 60. And I
Yeah.
just realized that.
I love that you said that. We have neuroplasticity. We do. Like it is very easy when you start this work to look back at your childhood, and maybe there is a lot, and that can seem intimidating. Like, oh my gosh, I just found out about trauma. Turns out I have a whole bunch or whatever. But that's really less relevant than, what's going on right now. And that ability to just observe and change things, that neuroplasticity, I mean, we always have that in our lives. We can always change those things. But like you said, to your point, sometimes we might not even realize that the physical manifestation has that root in the nervous system. But if you think about the nervous system, it's designed to like mobilize you or shut you down for protection. So it affects all the areas of the body. It affects your breathing, your heart rate, your digestive system, your reproductive system, your muscle tension, the water sodium balance, like your immunity, all of this global systems of your body. if it's a survival state, they want to change for optimal survival. But what we do is live in survival states all the time. So of course our body, breaks down, it takes a toll. It'd be like sprinting all the time. Sometimes you need to stop and just walk, or sometimes rest. And that's why that rest and repair state, like we just need to cultivate more of that on purpose. And that will solve so many of those stress related health problems.
Yeah, I love that you brought up neuroplasticity, because I am doing a series in August for Men Who Inspire Me. And one of the guys that's coming on, I already recorded the interview, is somebody who survived a massive stroke, but he's
Mhm.
continuing to improve after 2 years. And
Amazing.
in the healthcare industry,
Yes.
they make it sound like 6 months is pivotal and
Yeah.
don't expect much after that. But he doesn't buy into that, and he's not believing it. So the mind body connection again is huge. Same with me thinking I can actually change something that's been there for a long time. If you just accept things for how they are, if he just went with the industry standard and what the therapists were telling him this past year, he's like literally walks by himself sometimes, and he lost everything on the one side. So he's pretty remarkable. That's Dante. He's coming in August. But it just question everything.
Yeah. There are so many limiting beliefs that I don't even realize that I have. I just found one the other day where doing a certain yoga move, I just believed it would always feel this certain way. And I actually saw the teacher do that move, and my hamstring started cramping when I just watched it. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I have so much prediction of what's going to happen that even when I watched a person doing it, my muscles started cramping.
Oh wow, that's so cool. That's
Yeah.
like in the documentary Heal.
Oh, yes.
It is crazy. Like, no, don't you just like want to tell everybody about this? Like,
Oh, yeah. That's why I started my podcast, and, it's crazy stuff.
what's your podcast called?
It's called Unstoppable Body and Mind.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us a little, unless there's anything first before we move on and talk about what you do, is there anything else that you want to cover about Anchored? I think we kind of covered.
I think we talked about, I think just the title like makes so much sense to me, because when we talk about that ventral state, the rest and repair state, when she's saying anchored, she's really saying like cultivate this sensation, this feeling in your body of like, it's going to be okay. Things work out for me. Life is good. Some of these things we might be even resistant to thinking, but when we can start to believe those and think those more and more, that's where we can anchor from. And from there, we can venture out. We always want to evolve. We want to have that stress in our nervous system sometimes, because it means we're challenging ourselves and expanding. But when we can do it from that anchored place, then the expansion is so much more productive and useful, and we're not getting stuck, where we have that base to work from. And yeah, just that base of anchored and being anchored and
Yeah.
safety and security. If you are that kind of person that is like, I don't even know what that feeling feels like, or, maybe I felt safe at one point in my life, but I just feel stressed most of the time. Like, read that book. She goes through exercise after exercise of how to actually feel these different states in your body, so you can recognize them when your body does them, and then reverse engineer back to what were the thoughts and how can I, how
Yeah,
can
I
I
love that. She calls it inside out and outside in.
inside out and outside
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, I
Oh, one
really
last
love.
thing. Oh, yeah.
Oh
Go ahead.
no,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say I like the exercises, and that she actually has you name parts of your nervous system and stuff. So like for me now, I'm like, oh, okay, like it's totally different experience now when
Yeah.
things get activated, because I'm just like thinking of it totally different.
Yeah, it's like you have the vocabulary to describe it. And so instead of
Yeah.
it just being a reaction that happens, you're like, you can make sense of it and you can process it. And the last thing I'll say is what is such good news is we can take whatever activates us right now. And when we trace it back and figure out and resolve it and, make peace with it and comfort ourselves, and then it's like resolving that piece of trauma from the past. So we don't have to go digging around of like, let's remember this memory. You just see what comes up for you today, like what triggered me today, And by processing that, you're increasing your window of tolerance, which is what you can tolerate, the stressors you can tolerate, and you're resolving that past trauma, because it's like a thread that you're, pulling out of this big giant ball of yarn. And you're just, each time you're pulling one of those threads out and like getting it out of that knot.
Yeah, I like that it can be future focused or in the present.
Yeah. Because some people, again, it's kind of like, okay, so now I have to like think of everything that happened when I was 5 and everything that happened when I was 6. And no. You just kind of like
comes up, right?
Yeah, you go with what is going on now, and that will resolve those survival states from the past. Because basically it's your nervous system going into survival states automatically. And the more we can, befriend and understand, then we won't go into those states as often or stay as long.
Yeah. All right. I love that. So why don't you tell the audience how they can work with you and what you do?
Okay. So yeah, if you want to listen to my podcast, it's on all the major platforms. It's Unstoppable Body and Mind. And then I have a website you're welcome to look at. All the links will be there. And I really like to put a lot of my fun content on Instagram. So if you like Instagram, that's where I put, a lot of videos and information. I do have a monthly membership. So when you're ready to like have some support and really work on this for yourself, there's a couple of ways, either in a group, and that's a monthly membership. And so that has a couple calls a week and a nice group atmosphere, like we were talking about with the co-regulation, for people who feel like, they want some support and don't want to do it alone. And then for people who are really wanting to, get to the root of some of these things, give themselves a longer container, work one-on-one, I do have a few one-on-one spots available.
All right. Awesome. Is there anything else?
The spot, just dependent. I'm not going to say they're always available, but yeah.
Well, right. We understand.
Spots reserved for people. And like I said, that is such a nice way when you're like, I really want to, focus on this or make a lot of progress in a shorter time. Because then we can do a lot of this somatic coaching, which we didn't really talk about what somatic coaching is. But if you can imagine, when we're talking about feeling things in your body, there's emotions, there's physical sensations. And the coaching that I do combines the thought work with, how your body's feeling in that somatic area.
Yeah, that's funny because I kind of think we did talk about somatic coaching because I think that's what Anchored is.
Yeah, we didn't call it that name, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes I take those names for granted, because I remember even in a yoga class, it's probably like 5 years ago, someone said something like, this resets your nervous system. And I was like, what are they even talking about? Like, is there like a reset button? Like, what is this nervous system? What is a reset? So anyway, if these terms don't feel as familiar to you, there's so much information out there. I give out a lot of free information. Actually, I have some nervous system modules, which are 4 videos explaining the basics of the nervous system. It's like an hour and a half total, and those are for free. So you can look at the link that will be in the show notes, and that's a good beginner's like course for the nervous system, because I try to keep it really, really simple, but integrate all of how it affects the body.
Great. Well, thanks for coming here and talking about all this on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun.
We've been planning this for a while. So
yeah.
All right, audience. I know you learned something valuable here today. See you next episode. Thanks for being here and learning about Brain BS. I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. If you did, please take a little time to do a quick review, give me 5 stars, and share it with everyone you know. If you're actually interested in being on the podcast yourself or have questions about it, you can find me in the Brain BS podcast community on Facebook. See you next time.